Inshallah, we'll get started. I really want this to be a great conversation time, so I'm not planning for a long presentation, just a quick overview of our project, inshallah, and then open it up for questions. So this project is called the Building Blocks of Tarbiyah project. One of the things we're really passionate about at the Family and Youth Institute is really how to help youth thrive and how to help Muslim youth particularly flourish. And the communities that they live in and the context, the settings that they live in are really important to us. So alhamdulillah, we were blessed with this grant from the Templeton Foundation to really look into how are our communities, whatever that community is, we're not talking specifically about masjids, but how are our communities, those spaces that youth live in, really promote their character development. Next slide, please. So this project, we are doing it in partnership with a team over at Baylor University. So I'm co-leading this project with Merve Bolkaya Inche. And then we have a team of advisors made up of from folks from Baylor University, Dr. Samir, the executive director of the FYI, and then a few other folks who are really grounding us and advising us to really take a diverse approach to this project, inshallah. And again, I'm going through this just very high level because you'll have the website, you can check it out. And I really want to get to our Q&A time, inshallah. So what is this project about? Next slide, inshallah. As I said, it came from this idea that, oftentimes a big misconception that most of us have is that, virtue development and character development is not something that happens or psychology as a whole. And what you've heard earlier sessions today, that mental health is not something that's part of, our tradition as Muslims. And we know that that's absolutely not true. If you look at this model of positive youth development by Lerner and Eccles and Gutman, character development is very central, and it's all based on connection. But we also know from our religion and from what we've learned growing up and our prophetic model that character development is part of everything that we do. There's so many examples of this. I'm not going to go through all of them. But in the next slide, you'll see you've all heard so many different ways that we've talked about character development in as Muslims, right? If you look at the prophetic community and the way the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the way that he spread the message of Islam, he didn't start with salah, right? He didn't start with fasting. He started with character. And when people first saw him, they saw his character. And he spent a lot of time building that character, everybody around him. And so that's the same thing, that's what we're really looking at, is how is that happening in our communities for youth, or how is it not happening, right? Where are there barriers? And so some of the virtues that we're interested in, Roon will go into that, inshallah. But that's the heart of what we're looking to do, is how is this happening in our communities and what's working? Next slide. The way that we've set up the project is that there's two goals. We have sort of our community-based goals, because the other thing we're really passionate about at the FYI is really community engaged and community focused work. And it's also something that the Templeton Foundation is really passionate about, is where is the intersection between the work that's happening, sort of in the academic world or the clinical world, and with what's happening on the ground. And so and it's one of the reasons we partnered up with them, is that there's two parts to this. The community goals means instead of me sitting here as a researcher coming up with the research questions, we really wanted to be driven by the voices of the community. And so to do that, we wanted to start with building a community of practice, which is basically a network of Muslim youth leaders, Muslim youth workers, everybody that's on the ground doing this work and giving them a chance to voice their experiences and what they've seen with youth, but also a chance for them to network with each other and learn from each other. So we can come out of this 3-year project with not just a network of everybody doing this work, but also with best practices in terms of what's working on the ground and what's not. And then that information, what we learn from the community of practice in this network, would inform the research goals. So part of the project will be a convening that we do in person, and we've done some town halls already. We would use that information then to inform our actual longitudinal study that we'll be doing of about 900 Muslim youth over 5 waves. And we'll be using that to understand what are the character traits that we're talking about, that Muslim youth experience, what actually works, and then using that information to report back to the community in the final year of the grant. So I'll hand it over to Roon to sort of quickly go over what are the specific character traits we're talking and the specific questions, and then we can go into our discussion, inshallah.
So So when we're talking about character and virtues, we are defining it two different ways. So when we look at it Islamically, what does character and virtues, or tarbiyah, what does it mean? So linguistically, it means to increase, to nurture, to grow, and loftiness to expand. And informally, parents are engaging in this with how they're raising their children. So as you're raising your child, you're instilling sort of these virtues and these characters that you want your child to have. And when we look at it in a more systematic way, it's the physical characteristics, the social, moral, spiritual characters and virtues that we're examining. And then academically, so prior, this was understood to be personality, and personality is something that you're born with. But what we're understanding now is that it's not something that you're born with, but it's something that can be changed. So understanding it more as habits, and these habits are what a person does, not who they are. So they can be modified, they can be instilled, and it can change. And it's important to understand that there's a person and context interaction. So people are not in silos, but they're embedded in communities. So understanding that people can show up with different traits in different settings. And on the flip side, the setting can also help to sort of nurture and affirm these characters and virtues that we're looking at. So some of the characters and virtues that we're examining are patience, so sabr, gratitude, shukr, generosity, social responsibility, humility, self-control, and accountability, and mercy. How do people show mercy? And where do they show up in our community settings? So this can be in a Sunday school structured lesson plan and the curriculum. It can be in the halaqa discussions. It can be in social activities. We hear about youth having these sports outings or camps, and these very fruitful discussions are happening. And then in online conversations. And it's important to note that when we're working with the Muslim American community, that we also understand that we are diverse in and of itself. We're diverse ethnically, racially, geographically. So we're really holding space for all of those experiences and making sure that we get a variety of perspectives, so that not that there's one community that's sort of providing the input, but that we're getting a variety of input from communities across America. So back to you, Dr. Madiha.
Yeah, so I know we provided a very quick overview of the project, inshallah. It's a 3-year project. The one last thing I wanted to add before we get into just these discussion questions are just 2 clarifying things. When we say community, right, the focus of this grant, when Templeton put these projects out for us to apply to, they're really interested in community. So we're not talking about how is this happening in families, right? That's usually what we think about tarbiyah, but tarbiyah happens in communities as well. So it's really, how is it happening in a community setting, whatever that space is. It could be an online space, it could be the MSA, it could be a third space, community center, it could be a masjid, it could be anywhere. And then when we say youth specifically, we really are focusing on high school age to college age, but it's really that early group that we're really focusing on is high schoolers, because most of the research that's been done on this has been on Christian populations, and it's been on older ages. So we don't really understand how is this looking like for teens. So you think of like your youth groups, think of where teenagers are spending their time and where are they learning these things, like being patient or having self-control. Where is it happening? Where is it not happening? What are the barriers? So without, just if anybody has any questions overall, or we can just get right into the discussion session, inshallah. Does anyone have any quick questions about the project before we get into discussion?
You do have a question. Do you want me to give? Well, I mean, I'm wondering what the purpose of the project, what are you hoping to do by the end of the year?
The mic. You have to say it into the mic.
Okay.
Assalamualaikum, Madiha. This is Hanan.
Right.
Hi, go. I think I may have missed this, but I was hoping you can clarify what you're hoping to get at the end of the project. Like, what is the purpose of the project? What are you doing throughout the 3 years? And what is kind of the product? Is there a product? Is it just kind of the networking? Is it just the understanding and exploring piece? So.
Yeah, we're going to go into next steps at the end of the talk, inshallah, where we'll go through what we're doing in the 3 years. But the goal really is that this isn't just about us gaining information. It's about building this infrastructure, this network, so that Muslim youth workers and Muslim youth leaders have something they're a part of, but also contributing to. So it's a live network that continues, but we also want to get at best practices. So we are looking for some kind of end product. The beauty with these grants is we get to leave it vague. So we're not committed to like a toolkit. We're not committed to a report, but we are committed to some kind of best practices of what's working and how does the community, how's the network itself want to put it out there. And so what they're looking for will be really important. So if they tell us, hey, we really want this to be a series, you know, like an online course, you know, if we want this to be a report, we want this to be a video series, that's kind of how we'll build it. So it's really supposed to be from the ground up, not us imposing, you know, what this end product should look like. And then beyond that, obviously, there's the research study. So that's the big part of it. And we'll go into it more, inshallah, when we do next steps at the end. All right, so let's go into this discussion, because one of the reasons we wanted to present this at this conference was to really hear from you all about your thoughts on what's happening, so we can use that to inform the work that we're doing. So I want you to start with this first question of what kinds of virtues have you seen in the work that you do, whatever that work is. What virtues are you seeing, or character traits are you seeing that your community cares about? It could be, it's fine if all of you come from different walks of life. We'll figure out how to use your information. So anybody can go for it. I'll let Rune facilitate, because it's hard for me to see any questions or anything like that. Does that question make sense? I don't want to go into specifics because I don't want to lead you towards thinking of one virtue. So that's why I'm leaving it vague.
She can't hear you unless you have the mic. Yeah, there you go.
I was just saying, I think like integrity is important, or people value integrity in people, and that like helps build like a community you can trust and feel comfortable in. I hope this is where the question's supposed to go.
Mm-hmm. Just to clarify, are you saying that you see integrity talked about a lot with youth?
I think it is one of the bases that like makes people feel comfortable.
Okay.
I think I'm not necessarily in youth community, like around a lot of youth currently, but youth adjacent, I think.
That's fine.
The conversations around integrity. Yeah.
Okay. Other virtues people are seeing, or it's coming up a lot?
So in my community, at least, they do a lot of like halaqas and discussions for high school age youth. And we do a lot about kind of how to be your own individual and how to not, how to kind of stay true to your Islam and individuality, even when maybe your high school or your friend group does not.
Okay, is that kind of like, is it like identity, or is it pride? Is it resisting peer pressure? Is it kind of all of that?
I think so. I think especially resisting peer pressure, like how to surround yourself with the people who are going to lift you up, you know, especially Islamically. And then definitely also the pride in being Muslim and sticking to that.
Okay. Others?
Actually, I'm glad you spoke first, because it reminded me then of something. I think a lot of what we talk about in our community, which is, by the way, the same community she comes from, is that how do you hold on to your deen without losing your dunya? How do you hold on to your dunya without losing your deen?
Okay, and in those conversations, so how do people talk about that, I guess? What traits are they talking about to be able to do that?
So they
like,
talk
are
a
you
lot about like they talk a lot about the, I mean, obviously basics of Islam and stuff like that, but also like something that is talked about a lot now that was never talked about back when I was growing up was like, how do you deal with mental health challenges? How do you maintain your sense of who you want to be in a world that is largely moving away from deen? Like in all faith traditions, they're hemorrhaging people at an amazing rate. And so how do we navigate all of these current challenges that we have to identity? Because they talk a lot about, you know, we're in a time and an age now where you have to accept everyone the way they are, that you're afraid to say who you are. Like, it's not okay to be conservative. It's not okay to be anti in your heart, even anything. Yet at the same time, they want everyone to accept them the way they are. And that's really hard. It's like, it seems very hypocritical, I think, to our youth and to our communities just in general that, you know, and I think faith communities all around the United States are dealing with this, you know, it's like anti-wokeness versus, you know, wokeness versus, you know, all this kind of thing is like, how can I be an individual, yet hold on to my deen, yet not be labeled as any ism? And then, you know, so it's all just a very big jumble, I think, that we're trying to just work through, both adults and kids together.
That's a great point. And I think the question I was also getting at is, in those conversations or trying to navigate that, what traits do you guys hear people kind of give to youth? Like, hey, if you, this doesn't make sense, but just to give a random example, if you have really good critical thinking skills, right? Or if you have patience, or if you have self-control, you'll be able to, if you can develop that, you know, you're really going to be able to navigate this like balance of deen and dunya and the pressures. That's the heart of what we're trying to get, is in those conversations, what is it that youth are hearing when it comes to what trait or virtue will help them get through those challenges?
Assalamu alaikum. So my son is a part of a youth group at the masjid, and what they do is they focus a lot on the characteristics of the Sahaba. So they focus on really like the basic kind of like characteristic traits, such as truthfulness and generosity and helping your fellow neighbor. That's a lot of the, you know, every week they meet and they kind of pick a different characteristic. And honestly, you know, when I work with teens, you know, in the masjid and youth groups, you know, it's a lot of what I focus on as well, is like the characteristic traits of, you know, the Prophet ﷺ, and basic, you know, truthfulness. I'm thinking of truthfulness and generosity right now, like other ones aren't really coming to me, but definitely those basic characteristic traits, like to kind of go back to.
And it's interesting you said truthfulness and generosity, because that was sort of the follow-up question I was thinking of in my mind when you guys were all talking, is there a certain trait that you're hearing youth struggle with a lot, or hearing youth feel like it matters a lot to them? Like, you know, patience is what's really helping them, or generosity, or like rahma is really what's getting them through. You know, and I know teenagers aren't walking around saying rahma to each other, right? But that concept of like mercy and not being judgmental and being understanding, like, are there certain traits that are standing out in what you guys see, or youth, your own kids, whoever? Or the opposite, ones that they struggle with a lot? Like, is modesty getting harder, right? I know that's a very difficult question to ask, so I didn't mention it before.
Assalamu alaikum. What I see from my clients, especially the youth in high school, they often feel judged for the way they are dressed or doing things or go about things. And I think that isolate them from the family and the community. So I think this is something consistently seen with youth, at least in my practice. Thank you.
Good one. Any other traits that you guys are thinking of that you've seen? And again, this doesn't, I know we're talking about in the community, but the reason I'm asking you all is I recognize some of you are also clinicians. So if in your clinical work, you're seeing, you know, sort of indirectly, not what youth are saying, but traits that they are struggling with that you can tell in their experiences, or what has really helped them through, you know, things that they've talked about with you all, you know, self-control coming up, is generosity coming up, is modesty coming up. Is there anything else that you guys can think of before we go into our next question?
Assalamu alaikum. What you just shared, because I think that there's something developmentally appropriate and I think thematic in our communities where we see a lot of young people really yearn for self-expression and curiosity around what that means, which can sometimes come in tension like generationally, right? Like how do we balance in this society, maybe the pull of like figuring out who I am within this context of community while also wanting connection with community. Yeah, I think there's a struggle there, but a very clear yearning.
Assalamu alaikum. So some other things that I wanted to mention, like the character traits that we focus on when I talk to youth. I work with middle schoolers for the past 12, 13 years. And I feel like a lot of my conversations are around empathy. There's a lot of bullying, a lot of peer pressure among these youth nowadays, especially with social media. Like when I was in school, bullying stopped at school and then it dies out. If something does come out and the whole school is talking about it, it dies out over the weekend and we come back to school and there's another topic to talk about. But now it's following these kids. I'm talking to parents that their kids are on FaceTime and group chats and Snapchats and exposing each other and airdrops like throughout the school of pictures. So there's a lot of bullying going on. So empathy is and understanding each other. And the other thing is resilience. That's a big one because like when I go to the mosque, I'm talking to girls between the ages of 13 to 18, and they're complaining about there's a big generational gap between their moms and them, and they don't understand. And I think just focusing on resilience and how to be resilient and those proactive and protective factors, how to increase some like coping skills and so on. Those are important that we need to continue having the conversations with them. And they're responding, like just teaching them how to use positive thinking and different perspectives and all that. That does help because it helps them understand that generational trauma and how that they can break that cycle. So giving them that hope is another thing. Like, you know, you can be resilient, have hope that you can be the change, you can break that cycle. So it gives them that empowerment and the advocacy skills as well. Like if you're older, you're advocating for younger sisters. Like I grew up like that. Like I'm the oldest and I'm trying to find the balance, you know, to keep in peace with my parents, but also help my siblings have a voice and find their voice. So that's a big thing in our community and it still continues to be big.
Okay. Jazakallah khair. Thank you guys. I'm getting the 2-minute warning signal, so I'm just going to wrap up, inshallah. Hanan, you did ask the question about next steps, so I'll just wrap up here. So what we'll be doing, the way the project is set up, is in this first year of the grant that we're in right now, we'll be having an in-person convening where we'll bring together youth workers and researchers to do exactly what we just did with you now, but in an intense sort of 2-day workshop. And then we'll use that information and work with people in the second year through some 8 Zoom sessions and just really hash out what is actually happening, really dig into this to come up with perhaps curriculum, come up with that end product. And then in year 3, come back to another sort of in-person convening and build out what dissemination and what these end products could look like, whether they're toolkits or things like that I mentioned before. And at the same time that we're having these in-person convenings, asking these same questions that we did with you, we'll be using that information to launch a research study for about a year and a half between year 1 and year 2. We'll collect that data, analyze that data, take it back to the year 3 convening and say, what did we learn? Here's what you guys told us. Is this what's actually happening in this research study? And then use all of that to create some of these products of delivering back to the community, and then thinking about next steps for the project, inshallah. The last thing I'll leave you with is I would really appreciate everybody's support in disseminating the word for this upcoming study that we have, which also is focusing on virtues, specifically patience and self-control, or goals that the youth set for themselves. So if you could share this, we have to get 100 youth in the next week and a half. So if you could share this with anybody that you know that's 14 or 18 years old, 14 to 18 years old, we would really appreciate it. Jazakallah khair, I really appreciate everybody's feedback. And it was great virtually seeing you all. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Dr. Tahseen and Roon, for that wonderful discussion. I hope we can have more of those in the future. Next, I would like to present Wafaa Ateyah for our next presentation. Wafaa is a doctoral student in counseling psychology who works at the Family and Youth Institute. Wafaa's presentation will focus on relationships between adults and youth. Please help me welcome Wafaa Ateyah.
Assalamualaikum, everyone. My name is Wafaa Ateyah. I'm a doctoral student in counseling psychology. I'm also a graduate student researcher with the Family and Youth Institute, and I'm the project manager for our I Belong project. I Belong is a 3-year national pilot study aimed at both exploring and increasing adolescent belonging in the masjid. And today's conversation actually stems from the I Belong project, and I'll kind of draw the connection between the conversation and the project in a little bit. But today we'll be focusing on accountability and the roles of adults and adolescent belonging in the masjid. And I know the title says advocacy and allyship, but because we are limited in time today, we will just be focusing on accountability, inshallah. And as you'll see, throughout the presentation a little bit, and then the conversation that comes up, accountability is actually one of the main issues within our communities, and oftentimes advocacy and allyship can be born from accountability. And so inshallah for today, we'll be focusing just on accountability. And so a little bit about the Family and Youth Institute. So the FYI's mission is to strengthen and empower individuals, families, and communities through mental health research and education. I'm sure you'll hear a lot about the FYI. Dr. Madiha, who just presented a little bit ago, was from the FYI. But if you'd like to learn a little bit more about the FYI's theory of change, you're more than welcome to visit on the website. A little bit about I Belong. So like I mentioned, I Belong is a 3-year national pilot study project aimed at exploring and increasing the sense of belonging that American Muslim adolescents experience in relation to the masjid. And the project is divided into 3 phases. You have phase 1, which is our needs assessment phase. It's our data collection phase. It's where we aim to identify the areas and opportunities for sense of belonging in the masjid, which then goes into phase 2. So using the data that we collected in phase 1, we then create interventions based on, some of what we identified in the first phase. And we're currently in phase 2, going into phase 3. And so phase 3 is where we take our findings from phase 1, disseminate it into the community, kind of present our findings, and as well as the resources and the interventions designed in phase 2. So phase 3 is all about dissemination. So how does all of this kind of tie into accountability? So we have we conducted our needs assessment. We used a multi-pronged approach. We administered a national survey where we asked young adults to kind of reflect on their experiences of belonging in their masjid as adolescents. We partnered with masajid all over the country where we interviewed adults in the masjid to kind of, understand what adolescent belonging looks like in their community. We also interviewed adolescents to kind of hear from them about their experiences of belonging. And then from there, once we collected all of our data, we created our interventions in the form of a workshop. So we had one workshop for adults, and the objective of that workshop was to really provide adults with tools on how to actively listen to youth. And then we have our youth only workshop, which aims at empowering youth to be advocates of change for themselves. And then we have our joint workshop, which is in a form of like a facilitated conversation between the adults and the teens. But community-based research isn't helicopter-like, where we're not the researchers going into these communities. We want to actively engage the communities in every step of the way. And so we created these interventions alongside our communities. So we would have meetings with point contact people in each of the communities that we were partnered with, hearing them, what are your thoughts? What changes should we make to our interventions, et cetera. And, one thing that they were like, these are great. These workshops are great. They would give us recommendation, but there was during one of our conversations, something came up and they were like, these are great, but nothing's going to change without accountability. Nothing's going to change in our masajid if we ourselves as adults don't hold other adults accountable. But what does that look like? What does accountability in our masajid look like? So after that conversation we had with our point contact people in each of the communities, we then met with thought leaders, educators, researchers all over the country, some of whom I see here today, to kind of hear from them their thoughts on what accountability looks like in our masajid. And I'm really excited to be able to have this conversation with you all today as educators, researchers, imams in our community, to kind of hear from y'all what accountability looks like. And just to kind of loosely define it, I know I'm kind of saying accountability over and over, but accountability is the acknowledgement and application of responsibility for actions, for whether that be our own actions, holding ourselves accountable, or the actions of other people, holding other people accountable. But before we dive into today's conversation, I just want to set the stage. We are limited on time. And so although personal narratives are super, super rich, I'm a qualitative researcher. I love hearing stories. We do ask to kind of keep it to the question. We will have a survey at the end for if any of you have personal stories you want to share or anything related to what we talk about. We would love to hear it. We would love to learn from it. We would love to apply it to the work that we do. And so there will be a QR code at the end of the presentation for you all to continue the conversation with us through a virtual space. But we ask that everyone kind of keep their comments maybe to 1 to 2 minutes. We are going to be separating into 2 groups. So we'll have all 3 questions. There'll be one group on this side, one group on this side, and Dr. Hanan and I will be facilitating the conversations with the same questions, and then we'll come back as a group and kind of debrief on what we talked about in our respective groups. But just to kind of overview the questions, so our first question is, what are the barriers to accountability in our local masajid? Barriers to accountability means what makes it hard for us to hold ourselves and to hold other people accountable. Examples can include ego, masjid infrastructure, masjid leadership, etc. Our second question is, what are tangible skills that supportive adults can learn to increase a sense of accountability among one another? So is that communication? Is that adolescent development, etc.? And then our third question is, which parts of our mosque culture and infrastructure must change to promote accountability? So is that having, a point person who can resolve conflict? Is that having trainings, anti-sexism trainings, anti-bullying trainings, anti-racism trainings, trainings on how to be a mentor, etc. So here we have all of our 3 questions. So if we can kind of, I know I see 2 sides already, but if we can have some people on this side, maybe migrate over here so we have more of an equal split, and then we'll dive right into our conversations. Okay. And then my group, we can go over here. Okay, yeah, I'll go over there. Assalamualaikum, everyone. So we do have around like 2 or 3 more minutes. So I just wanted to come back together so we can do a quick debrief. But which group would like to start with their debrief of just sharing a few quick points that y'all kind of talked about? Okay.
A big point that we talked about was towards the end, how can we get adolescents to come in the masjid and also stay in the masjid? Because we brought up that it's the same kids going in and out of the masjid. We said that there's different like for example, I work with mass, and what we do is that we do events that target the youth. So like Super Bowl Sundays, and they had like a whole event with food and stuff, and it was crucially, these events happen Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, where kids are more likely to go in and out or spend time with undesirable people doing undesirable things. So instead of that, they'll be spending it with the masjid. And the most important thing is just to get them in. Doesn't matter how you get them in, as long as they're in, then it's easier to keep them in.
Anyone else want to share? Anyone from that group want to share a little bit? No pressure.
We're talking about the person, right?
Or any of just a general debrief, yeah.
We just talk in general.
about some of the cultural, generational, gender gaps, I guess, in understanding and representation. We talked a lot about, where is it that people are coming from and where are they bringing with them, and how that's like affecting what's happening in the mosques. And I have a question, okay, we change, like we hire or elect a person, for example, and then just find that they kind of go back to the way things were before. And, what can we do to kind of move things forward instead of making a step forward and 2 steps back, and, with that. And I would think like a really great example of, things that we can do and making dialogue, get feedback from the community. Including obviously even on the boards, public messages, so that their voices are being heard, that women's voices are being heard, that no one's being marginalized or cut out of the conversation. When we look at like what's going on with the messages, why we're losing our youth or women or converts or whatever, it's always like you feel like your voice is not being heard. Then why would you stick around?
100%.
Why would you pay dues? You say like our messages are falling apart structurally. It's like no one's going to pay money. You feel like they don't belong here.
Yeah.
So, and I know this is a conversation that's been happening for a very long time. Areas of research on stuff that's been happening, but some communities are doing better than others, but we have new challenges as we have new communities coming in. Some of them from war-torn countries and displaced, and the generations that came before, maybe in the 70s, for example, were better off educationally and financially, but now we have new challenges as we're getting people from places as refugees, not as immigrants necessarily. And then how does that clash with those who have been born and raised here now, second and third generation? How are we diversifying a bit more? That's a blessing to diversity, but it's also a massive challenge. And how do we stop ourselves from splintering more and more into these subgroups that, again, don't have those steps?
Yeah, so I'm hearing a lot of responsiveness, how to be responsive and proactive and preventative. So, yeah, and so go next slide. So it sounds everyone had such fruitful conversations. I'm excited to kind of reflect on all of your responses that we have here. But we do ask that if you have any other thoughts or questions, or just, feedback or just any other personal narratives. I know, at least in our groups, there was, quite a few, like personal experiences with the masjid. If you could, scan this QR code, we have the same questions listed there. So you're more than welcome to just quickly scan it if you all would like. I see some phones, I'll wait like a few more seconds. But as part of our needs assessment, we did decide to, recruit again. In our first recruitment, we recruited within the communities that we were partnering with, but we do want to diversify the voices of the adolescents that we're hearing. So if any of you know any adolescents between the ages of 13 to 18, please do share this flyer with them. And if you'd like me to send you a PDF version of the flyer, feel free to email us at ibelong@thefyi.org, inshallah. And as always, okay. Yeah, okay, yeah. So I'm sorry about that. I'll kind of go into the settings. But if y'all can follow us on Instagram, like Dr. Samira was saying, and all of our socials, feel free to. Jazakumullah khair.
Thank you, Wafaa, for that great presentation and discussion, very engaging. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Hamada Hamid. Dr. Hamada Hamid is the co-director of the Veteran Epilepsy Center in West Haven, Connecticut. Additionally, he currently serves as the chief editor of the Journal of Muslim Mental Health. Please help me introduce Dr. Hamada Hamid.
This is managing mentor session, and so we started for this session. Okay, fine. All right. So okay, can you guys hear me? Okay. Okay. So what we're doing right now is managing mentors, like how do you manage your mentor kind of session. We started this around 7 to 8 years ago. I'm using the royal we. I started some years ago. It's been kind of fun over the last several years. At that time, I was kind of junior, entering mid-career. Now I'm more senior academic, and I have many mentors that I continue to work with, and I've been doing mentoring workshops myself. So this is, most of the time it's a small group, and we go around and talk through everybody's issues. This is a bigger group than I'm used to. Is everybody here for managing the mentors session? So let me make sure of that. Okay. Okay. So I'll switch it up a little bit since we have a bigger group. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of outline of how to think about mentoring. And again, this was designed to be participatory. If I knew it was so many people coming, I would have broken up into 2 groups. But let me give some outlines. So let me get a show of hands. Who has a mentor? Show your hand. Okay. Who's currently in graduate school? Who's applying to graduate school? Okay. Who's a postdoc fellow? Okay. Who's a faculty? No faculty. Okay. What Samir, you just observing? You raise your hand. Okay, you're a mentor. We're going to be talking about you. Who's here from FYI? Excellent. Okay. Okay. So the way I framed the managing the mentor talk, first of all, it's supposed to be very participatory. It's supposed to be a workshop, and so we're supposed to troubleshoot and talk and try to address people's issues. So feel free to interrupt me or talk to me throughout. And I frame it in the sense of boundaries, setting boundaries, much like we do in counseling or in therapy, and be very deliberate and intentional about the who, why, what type of mentoring, where and when, and how, of course. Okay, so we've lost some people. Okay, that's actually good. Okay, so let's, we'll go really fast. I want to name, institution, where you are in your career. Okay, and what I should say, discipline too. Okay, and I'll add, you can see I'm winging it. Is this research, clinical? What kind of mentoring you're seeking? Yeah. Good, next.
My name is Roland. I'm with the FYI as well. I'm a 4th-year PhD candidate at the University of Minnesota. And I'm interested, I guess, in both research and clinical.
Okay, excellent. Yes.
My name is Annette. I recently graduated, still a limited license in humanities supervision.
Okay.
I was teaching for a very long time. I missed that part.
Okay.
I love doing obviously clinical work right now, but as soon as I get fully licensed, I think
Okay. Excellent. Okay. This will be relevant to that. Next.
I'm also FYI. I'm going to be applying to graduate school, and I want to do community-based psychology.
Okay.
That's what I'm doing now.
Okay, excellent. Okay. Okay. Yeah, seriously. That's how you introduce. Samir has your eye on you. Okay. Yeah, that's why you're here. You're trying to recruit. Okay. All right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Okay, good.
My name's Wafaa. I'm with the FYI.
Okay.
I'm a 2nd-year doctoral student in counseling psychology at the University of Florida, and I'm interested in both clinical and physical.
Okay, good.
I'm Aya. I'm a undergrad student here at Michigan State.
Okay.
I'm applying to Oxford with medical school.
Oh, okay, cool.
So I have a lot of mentors to add to that.
Okay. Oh, well, Hiba, Sango. Okay, yes. Okay. Oh, okay. Good. Is this my path? Okay. Next. Okay, inshallah. Excellent. This is managing your mentor workshop for the next 40 minutes. Everything's delayed. So if you're here for the journal, it's another half an hour. Yeah, yes, I'll give you some credits. Wahiba, my mentor. Okay. Go ahead.
My name is Jaylan. Fourth year doctoral champion counselor. Boston. And I'm looking for any type of sort of
Okay.
to help me clarify what I want to do. Program. My heart is in clinical work, but I have some question marks.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay.
My name is Zara. I am also with the FYI.
Okay.
I recently graduated with my bachelor's degree in biology last year. So I am figuring out what I want to do. I do think that I want to maybe research part-time to work with youth.
Okay. Yes.
I recently graduated from psychology.
Okay, excellent. Oh, excellent. Sorry, applying to. Okay. Okay, very good. Got it. Okay. So in the context of mentors, we have a variety of people. So a lot of kind of graduate students are doing more traditional kind of research track, some clinicians who are doing more clinical track, and still kind of figuring out. So in the context of mentoring, again, we're going to frame this in terms of boundaries. First thing is why. In this case is why does a mentor want to mentor you? Okay, because you want to think about alignment. You want to make sure you guys are a good fit. And so what do you think of the reasons why a mentor wants to mentor? So you have Abu Ras here, professor of social work, and kind of published some seminal work on imams and Islamic chaplains in the field of mental health. So sometimes I send her students, say, would you mentor them? What drives a person, a professor, to mentor, or Samir, who's about to leave? What drives her to mentor? What's her motivations? Free labor? Okay, that's fair. Okay, good. That's true. Free. So we're going to broaden that out and say there's extrinsic reward and there's intrinsic reward. So there's the extrinsic reward is free labor, getting your work done. Okay, good. And so go ahead. Guidance. Okay. So what's the motive in terms of the mentor? How is that driving them? Okay. So that'd be the why of why you would want to be, why you'd want to seek a mentor. In terms of the question of why a mentor would do it, so I would link that in terms of intrinsic reward that they want to go ahead. That's it. Yeah. Okay. Good. Right. Okay, good. So I would say that's intrinsic reward, right? So you're a person in the field and you want to improve the system, and you're invested in the field, and so you want the field to work well. Okay. So in terms of thinking about how you select your mentor, and by the way, I should say mentors, because now we mentor by committee. Okay, and I have a professional mentor, I have a research mentor, I have a clinical mentor, I have many different, I have a completely administrative mentor, so I have different mentors. I still have these mentors, some of them I meet with weekly, to kind of help me guide. So it's mentoring by committee. But people are, as you said, are invested in their field and in the system. They want things to go well. That's an intrinsic reward. You guys had your hands up.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's, what I would wish that would be always the reason, but mentors wanting to kind of see the work that they do continue and see the work continue. But what I often see happen in academia is kind of checking off that quota, meeting that quota. How many students do you have? How many committees are you on? et cetera. And so there's what I would ideally like for all mentors to be, and there's actually what happens.
Yeah. So there's two levels to that. There's an intrinsic reward that they want to see the field move forward, but there's an extrinsic reward. They're also being judged for the promotion. Okay, so they're trying to go up literally the ladder, and so they have to check off how many mentees they have, and so they have an intrinsic motivation for you to be successful. But if you're going to kind of dabble, okay, so we've all had experience of people students who come with you, they dabble for like a month or two, they don't see things through, and you might have even gotten a good experience. Like, okay, I figured out that I don't like that, but it kind of hurts the mentor, okay? And they might kind of screen you or vet you, say, okay, what's your time commitment? You have to think about alignment and what's in their interest. There's some hands up here, yeah.
There are some mentors who believe that the mentor and mentee relationship is a bi-directional one.
Mm-hmm. Oh, good.
Well, they can pulse on what new ideas.
Right. Yeah, that's a good one. I don't know if I have that in my notes. Okay, so yeah, so they are learning. So mentors learning from the students. So there's an intrinsic reward of the mentor actually wants to learn and keep, as you said, fresh. There's another hand over here, then there. There's another hand over here. Over here, go ahead. Right. Right, legacy. Exactly. Go ahead.
On the negative side,
Power trip. So we'll say this intrinsic reward is more of ego thing, which is important. It's not a trivial issue. Sure.
And I have and they're taking much care of my social work. So this is one. The second one is sometimes, you know what, I really learn so much from my students, you know, and learning from students because they are completely different. This is one. They have different ideas. They have different. So when I really have students, you know, I really pick up things and I learn so much. And of course, they are my co-authors. So my goal for my growth is creating a new generation of Muslim mental health research scholars. That's it, because we don't have that. After 9/11, we start to shine, you know. But before 9/11, we were very few. We didn't come out of myself. Another person, we people to reestablish the whole entire, you know, mental health communication. And this will come from all.
Allah.
2003, receiving the phone call, you know, from Hamada. I was United Arab Emirates because I was not able to get a job here. So I had to carry my tickets and go there. And when Hamada called me, I was like, sure. But thanks to them, I mean, we have a lot of fun.
There's been a theme in this conference. Everybody fighting with me. Yeah. Someone write that down. So I want to push back softly. Okay, I want to push back softly and say there's Wahiba is a conscientious mentor, and she doesn't just use free mentoring. There are mentors, and part of the point of this session is to manage. Sometimes you have bad mentors. Every person who's senior enough, including Wahiba, has had a bad experience with a mentor, and so we're trying to kind of get in front of that. There are people, we talked about intrinsic reward, extrinsic reward. I'm trying to give you guys tools and a framework to think about how do you select your mentor, and make sure that it's lined up. Yes.
Yeah, I also want to add, I've had mentors that see themselves in me, and in some ways that can really, it can be a barrier to my own growth.
Okay. That's a great point. That's a great point. Yeah, so it's kind of, what's the psychobabble term for that? Kind of transference, right? And so you over-identify, so you have to think about that. I have a talk about transfer and counter-transfer, that's a different time. Okay, so we talked about why, like what motivates them. You have to think about aligning things to make sure they're invested in your success. And this intrinsic and extrinsic is not necessarily wrong to have intrinsic or extrinsic reward. The second kind of level is what type of mentoring? And so I kind of gave you some suggestions of what type of mentoring I get. Tell me some, we said research mentoring. What else? What kind of other mentoring could you get? So let's go within research. With research, there's even subtypes, like what kind of mentor can you get? Yes.
You get more of like an advisor type mentor.
Okay.
Where they're not directly working with you on the day-to-day, but
Okay.
you consult with them.
Okay, that's a good point. So somebody has some distance that gives you kind of more informal things. Okay, good. What else? Yes.
Or navigating sort of like a predominantly white space.
That's interesting. Yeah, so that is mentoring. A mentor should be helping you navigate that. I wouldn't say that we research. That would be more professional. Professional. That'd be like next in my list of types. So research, I would kind of move things along. So one is subject matter expert, and other one is the methods expert. So you might want to develop, methodological skills in, machine learning, or in qualitative research, or in community-based participatory research. You find a mentor for that. Guess what? Doesn't have to be Muslim, right? You just want to get the best person you can find for that methods. What happens, most of you guys, or many of you guys, might want to do stuff on Muslims. And so you want to find somebody who has some expertise on Muslim subjects. Be careful, you have to be, and this is, I'm going to digress a little bit, in terms of what is your journey, what is your identity as a researcher. You might have more interest in refugees, and Islam comes as a focus. You might not need a Muslim researcher, maybe a refugee expert. So conceptualize methods mentor versus a subject matter mentor. And so wherever institution you're at, think about who is good for these type of things. And so just because you don't have a person that's expert, I get this call all the time of, oh, we don't have anybody who understands Islam and Muslims. Well, who do you have? Well, I have this person who has expertise in this and that. Use them for either subject matter or methods. By the way, if I'm talking too fast, tell me to slow down, because sometimes I have that issue. So clinical, that's more straightforward. Is whatever clinical skills you want to develop, we'll skip through that. Research, professional. So professional, there's a couple levels to that. So research mentor, clinical mentor, professional mentor. Part of it is kind of this, like navigating the professional world and like administrative, how to manage a mentor, how to get promoted, especially when you're in faculty, how to get a grant, how to get published. And sometimes you have a separate mentor who's going to help you with that. Is there a time issue or? Okay. Or even like where to present your conferences, how to put an abstract together, and be deliberate, be thoughtful. You don't necessarily want to get the fancy big name person. Why is that? Why are you not